Hello and welcome to this presentation on the sonnet. This is not a comprehensive presentation on the sonnet. The sonnet is a surprisingly varied form, even though it's often presented as something fairly limited. The purpose of this presentation is to introduce you to reading a sonnet by Shakespeare. For my sample sonnet, I've selected Sonnet 73, which is my favorite sonnet by Shakespeare, and I think that it's an excellent introduction to the sonnet form as Shakespeare employs it. Let me begin by reading it. That time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves, or none nor few, do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold, bare ruined choirs, where late the sweet birds sang. In me thou seest the twilight of such day, as after sunset fadeth in the west, which by and by black night doth take away, death's second self, that seals up all unrest. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire, that on the ashes of his youth doth lie, as the deathbed whereon it must expire, consumed with that which it was nourished by. This thou perceiv'st, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well which thou must leave ere long. I'm going to confine my comments to the general structure of the sonnet. I'm not going to talk about rhythm or meter. You have probably been taught that that a sonnet is 14 lines, that it has a certain rhyme scheme, which it does, and that it is consistent with that it's iambic pentameter, which means that its bass rhythm is unstressed, stressed. We can see this in the first line, that time of year thou mayst in me behold. You don't have to force the rhythm. It's actually iambic, or rather I should say the iambic foot, the unstressed, stressed, is the general rhythm of common speech, which is why poets like to make use of it. But I want to point out in certain instances, for example, here, Shakespeare uses or employs what is called a substitution. In other words, in the first 4 lines we see, that time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves, or none or few, do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold. Bare ruined choirs. See, right here, it's not an unstressed, stressed. Bare takes a stress as well. So this right here, where you have a foot, that's in the case of a sonnet, those are 2 syllables. You have a stressed, stressed, and stressed. He uses that here, and he does the same thing here, death's second self. So we have a stress, stress. A good poet is not going to stay or stick with the rhythm, the bass rhythm, the iambic pentameter. A good poet is going to find moments where it's effective to alter the rhythm in order to draw greater attention or give emphasis to certain moments in the poem, and Shakespeare does this. But I'm not going to go into great detail about that because I just don't have the time for that. So instead, let's go ahead and talk about the rhyme scheme. As you may have already been taught, the rhyme scheme for a sonnet, a Shakespearean sonnet, is A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. In other words, there's alternating rhymes here and here and here and here. and then a new set of rhymes here and here and here and here. Same thing here, and then the final two lines rhyme with each other. What's more interesting, though, aside from the rhymes itself, is what the rhymes do to the poem. The rhymes give the poem a very particular, or the sonnet, I should say, a very particular kind of structure. And as you can see here, if we isolate the interlocking rhymes of the first four and the second four and the third four lines, and then of the final two lines, the couplet, we see that there is a very particular structure for the sonnet. The terms for this structure are quatrain and couplet. So, the first four lines of a sonnet, of Shakespearean sonnet, referred to as the quatrain. So are the second four and the third four. So you can see that the structure of a Shakespearean sonnet, generally speaking, is four quatrains followed by a couplet. Now, why is this important? Well, as we're going to see, each quatrain, the first quatrain introduces a theme, and then the subsequent quatrains develop that theme. And then when we get to the couplet, Shakespeare usually does one of two things. He either emphasizes or brings to a close the theme, or he introduces a contrasting statement at the end. Again, I would love to be able to go through more of these sonnets to show you the different ways Shakespeare employs the couplet or the sonnet form, but we just don't have the time. The idea here is to try to show you how to let the sonnet teach you how to read the sonnet. So in this particular sonnet, the structure here is that Shakespeare introduces a theme, that time of year thou mayst in me behold. We're going to talk more about this later, but he introduces in this quatrain right here a metaphor. The time of year is the time of year where there are yellow leaves. The boughs, there are none or few, and they shake against the cold. And the sweet birds sang there lately, but they do not sing anymore. So clearly, what we're dealing with in this quatrain is autumn or fall. A new point is established in the second quatrain, where we move from year to day, and it's sunset. So you should at this point now realize, okay, well, we're talking about the end of the day, we're talking about the end of the year, and then he moves to a third point, a third metaphor, and this is a fire that is going out. So all of these have a thematic relationship. They're all metaphors about the ending of something. And that brings us to the couplet where he makes a claim. And I'm going to hold off on discussing the couplet until later. But as you can see, in reading a Shakespearean sonnet, you should look for this kind of structure here. You should be looking to see what's introduced in the first quatrain, and then what Shakespeare does with that in the second and third quatrains. In many respects, Shakespeare is structuring a sonnet like like one would an essay, with each quatrain being a paragraph that introduces a theme or a main idea and develops it, and then the conclusion functions like the thesis of an essay. Really, he does this deliberately. The sonnet is a highly rhetorical form. By that I mean a form that is self-consciously structured to develop a point and make a conclusion. All right, so let's talk about how the structure of the poem yields its content. So we begin the very first line, and the first line really does introduce our main theme. That time of year, thou mayst in me behold. Now you're going to notice that in the second quatrain, he introduces the same kind of structure. In me thou seest, thou mayst in me behold. So we're talking about somebody looking at the speaker of the poem and seeing something in that person. What's being seen in the first is that time of year, which we've already discussed is autumn. The second one is the twilight of such day. And in the third quatrain, we see that in me thou seest. So we have a repetition of the actual words used in the first line of the second quatrain. And in this case, it's the glowing of such fire. So in each one of the first lines of the quatrain, Shakespeare introduces the metaphor that he is going to develop over the course of the quatrain. Now, just in case you don't catch the importance of the metaphor, the final line of each quatrain helps to emphasize that. So notice that that at the end of the first quatrain, we have an underscoring of the metaphor of fall, right? Bare ruin choirs, that's a kind of secondary metaphor, where late the sweet bird sang. So there is a sort of decay or an absence. In the second quatrain, Shakespeare makes sure to let you know that what he's talking about with the sunset is that night is the equivalent in this metaphor of death. So we might now see what he's up to, that what that person, the person who's being spoken to, is seeing in the speaker is old age. And then the third and final quatrain, the final line of that, its emphasis is that the fire is consumed with that which it was nourished by. This is a very subtle metaphor, but consider if you've ever watched a fire burn, whether it's a bonfire, a fire in a fireplace, whatever. At a certain point, of course, everything becomes ash, the embers sink into the ash, and then the ash smothers the remaining embers. So the fire is consumed with the embers of the wood, the ash of the wood. So while initially it was the wood that gave the fire life, right, nourished by, but at the end, the remainder, what's left of the wood, consumes or quenches the fire in the embers. So in this situation, as you can see, we're moving into more complex metaphors. Here, what Shakespeare seems to be saying is, as we can see now, he's talking about life and old age, and he's saying at the end here of this quatrain that that it's life that that consumes you, that living is what leads to death. You wear yourself out, so to speak. Now, the arrangement of the metaphors in each of the quatrains, I want to draw your attention to. Obviously, we've talked about the year. The year is a lengthy period of time. However, in this second quatrain, the metaphor is a day, so that's much shorter than a year. And when we get to the third quatrain, it's a fire, which lasts less than a day. So each of the metaphors is talking about the old age or the nearing of the end of life. But in a poem here where he's using metaphors to show that there is very little time left in this person's life, at the same time, each metaphor is focused on a period of time that is shorter than the metaphor that came before. So in talking about the shortness of life through metaphor, each instance, life gets shorter and shorter and shorter. It is a brilliant presentation of this theme. I don't know what else to say about it. Now, what I've done here is to have removed the second and third lines of each of the quatrains, so that we can see what Shakespeare's doing in a more, I guess, look at the blueprint, so to speak. Each first line addresses the person looking at the speaker of the poem, and specifically what that person is seeing: a year, a day, and fire. But each one stands in for the termination of life, of age, of old age. And then, each quatrain ends with a final statement on the metaphor. Bare ruin choirs, death's second self, consumed with that. So there is a finality at the end of each of the metaphors, that each of the quatrains. And we want to see, and I've changed the fonts, as you can see: in me, behold, in me thou see, in me thou see, to show you that what Shakespeare is doing in those first lines, he is going to repeat in the conclusion. And in fact, let's take a look at that. This thou perceivest. Notice that is essentially, it's in the content of the words is the same as in me behold, in me thou seest, in me thou seest. So he continues to repeat this idea, this action. You're seeing in me this thing. He does that in the conclusion. So the conclusion is literally bringing everything to an end. And each one of that time of year, the twilight of such day, the glowing of such fire, all of these things are ending very soon. They are the final stages in the phenomena that Shakespeare is looking at. So, fall is the end of the year, twilight is the end of the day, the glowing of fire is the end of the fire itself. So, he is emphasizing and repeating what he's been saying throughout all the quatrains. So, what's up with the couplet? Shakespeare adds something, and that's his main point. That the result of perceiving the end of someone's life is to increase the love that that person feels. Because if you're going to have to lose something and you know it, you're going to love it much more strongly. So this conclusion brings the entire sonnet to its end. Well, I hope you got something out of this. Um, uh, I'm sure I could have done a better job. There are things that I would love to have talked about, but again, the idea here is to give you something of a roadmap to guide you as you read Shakespeare's sonnet.